Hi everyone, welcome to the Wheel of Mind, the Wheel of Time point of view reread podcast. Welcome to Season 3, Episode 12, where we're reading Nynaeve Almira's points of view. I'm your co-host, Lajara Dane of the Wide Aja.
Hi, and I'm Giskel Semaris, a scholar from Ilion. For any new listeners to our series, I want to remind you that the Wheel of Mind is an in-depth character reread podcast, which means we do drop spoilers just at random times without further notice, so this is your spoiler warning. Now today we're going to be examining The Fires of Heaven, chapters 39 and 40. I'll get us started with chapter 39, which is entitled Encounters in Samara. Nynaeve and Uno walked into Samara under the scrutiny of both white cloaks and the city guards. Luckily there were too many people for any of them to do more than look, though Nynaeve feared that her low-cut dress drew more attention than it should have, and kept adjusting her shawl to cover her cleavage. The city was packed over full of people, who were very diverse in their looks and their clothing, and the group had to fight their way through the crowd. Even the white cloaks in the city had to fight their way through the milling throng. Finally, turning down a less crowded but narrow alley, they were joined by Ragan, who also promised to rescue her. Light-burned men! They're always doing that. Without explanation, the two Shannarans left their weapons to a man who was sitting watching a small gate. Once they were allowed inside, they did tell Nynaeve that everyone had to be disarmed to approach, as there had been attempts on the prophet's life. Being his colleagues did not exempt them. In fact, that was the only reason that they were allowed in at all. They entered a finely built but neglected-looking house where an old woman was cooking cabbage stew. They went upstairs, finding the house almost empty of furnishings, and were stopped by a filthy man who acted as the door guard. He would not let them enter while the prophet was busy, but saw nothing wrong with Nynaeve standing so that she could see and hear inside. Masema, the prophet of the dragon, had changed. He had shaven his topknot, and was dressed in poor, nondescript clothing, and he was speaking with a beautiful and richly dressed woman, arguing with her, in fact. He had this look of madness in his eyes, and spoke with a cold, distant voice. The woman shared her many concerns with the prophet about crime and hunger in the city. He pronounced judgment against thieves, rapists, and murderers, all as if it were his word that were law here in Gildon. Then he had her remove and donate her jewelry to help feed the poor and the hungry. Many of her responses sounded almost like mantras. Once the woman left, Nynaeve was ushered in, and the prophet began berating her for the way she was dressed. Women like her caused men to think impure thoughts, instead of contemplating on the Lord Dragon and the light. Men and women needed to be scourged until they stopped chasing one another, and the bars and the taverns all needed to be burned. Nynaeve dropped her shawl and told him sharply that it was none of his business, or any man's business, to tell her how to dress, or any woman. Looking panicked, Uno quickly introduced her to the prophet, reminding him that she had grown up with the Lord Dragon, and that he looked upon Nynaeve almost as a mother. Nynaeve wisely swallowed any further retort, used the shawl to cover herself again, and after listening to the prophet talk at length of how blessed she was, and how she still should dress more appropriately, she mentioned that the Lord Dragon had requested her presence in Tyr, and asked if the prophet could help procure a ship to bring her there more quickly. After some more rambling, they were dismissed to leave. Outside, once they were well out of earshot and walking down the street, Nynaeve began a tirade against Uno and Ragan for going along with him the way that they did. They patiently explained to her that many people had been killed for showing much less disrespect than had Nynaeve. The crowds following the prophet were huge, and they were rabid. They would burn the taverns if he commanded it. In fact, they would do whatever he told them to. The woman that had been in with the prophet before them was Aleandre, the queen of Gildon. In fact, she was the fourth ruler in that country since the prophet had set up shop there, which explained why she was so submissive to him. On the heels of that discussion, Ragan mentioned that they were being followed by a white cloak. Nynaeve managed to get a glimpse of him, and it was none other than Golod Damodred.
I found it interesting how Nynaeve felt so dehumanized by the gaze of the prophet's men that she actually wished for something more normal, like a leer, which she had been experiencing a lot in the show, and I guess, moving around in these towns and villages. And I didn't really identify with that the first time I read this chapter, but I just had an experience a few days ago that I think I would have welcomed even some acknowledgement, even if it was negative. I was in some local antique stores downtown with a friend, and one of the stores we went into, the shop owner just did not acknowledge us at all. Like, we were like, "Hi, how are you doing?" when we came in, and said goodbye when we left, and his eyes followed us around the store, but he never said a word. And if we try to make eye contact to say something, like when we first came in, he just moved his eyes away and stared off into space. It was so uncomfortable. And I'm not sure why it was. We were trying to figure it out because my friend has a foreign accent, and she wondered if was part of it, if it was some xenophobia, or then we realized, is it because we were wearing masks and that's unusual where we are right now? Whatever it was, it's just oh my gosh, I would have welcomed something antagonistic compared to that, just not knowing and having to figure out what this creepy stare is about. It was unnerving. So when I was first doing my notes for this, I'm like, I don't know what that feels like, wishing you could actually be leered at. Is this another men riding women thing? And I'm like, no, I just don't think I've experienced such a dehumanized, lack of regard that many times. And I think that's how I would characterize that situation I experienced too.
Right. And there are different socio-political reasons for that. As you said, it could be xenophobia. It could be someone who, finds a, political something in what you're doing or the way you're dressed. Mm-hmm. There are many different things that people can be triggered by if they have a tendency to have a very, very narrow worldview of their own. Mm-hmm. They can be very easily triggered by something that you're not even aware of. Then again, there are people who have things like autism or perhaps Asperger's, somewhere on that spectrum, where they have trouble initiating conversations. They have trouble making eye contact. And it's hard to judge that, but the way that you felt so uncomfortable leads me to believe that he had some problem with not with himself, but with you or with your friend.
Right. And that's an important distinction to try to make too, that we can't always know. I mean, we can unintentionally be ableist and find behaviors creepy when maybe it's just people have different ways of relating and communicating, or difficulties doing that. It's very extremely uncomfortable for some people to make eye contact, and that makes sense. So yeah, and that's something I didn't feel myself considering at the time, but I often try to when I see, body language I don't expect or something like that.
Yes.
So that's something important for our listeners to keep in mind. I guess it's just interesting. I would have welcomed any kind of negative reaction, even I have had out in public, and I think in the case of the prophet and his people in this story, it seems like they do fall into the very narrow-minded worldview, and they're very judgmental of other people, and don't see people outside of their group as fully people because they're unbelievers or something. The way that it sounds like Massima was talking about unbelievers anyway.
Right. The way they defined it exactly is very dehumanizing, and it has as much to do about control as it does about any kind of, I'm going to use quotes around the word worship. I don't think it's really so much the worship of the dragon or of Rand himself, because he would not welcome this, and I don't think he had a clue how bad this was. But it's more in Massima's case about control, and he's using this madness that he has, this religious fervor that he's initiating in order to control the people around him. And some people they feel more comfortable, I'm going to say, in a controlled environment, and we may use religion or different things to try to control that environment so we don't have these unhealthy or uncomfortable influences. But again, it's you see how unhealthy a level it has gone to here.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there are reasons to have some societal norms, and you kind of let society find those norms, you know, and find that balance. But when you got someone who's enforcing that and pushing that, it always comes at the price of giving up freedom, of giving up happiness and joy. And what you find here is when it's taken to this unhealthy a level, you see how dangerous it is and how terrible it is. So, you know, what Masima is doing, again, to take it back to your experience this past week, he's not giving the typical responses that society would dictate, or not even the typical body language responses that where you would know where you stand with this person. Because I think that's part of it. When someone is giving atypical responses, whatever the reason, we feel very uncomfortable with it because you don't know where you stand with that person. As you said, if someone is just outright rude and they look at you and say, we don't serve your kind here because, just because you're a droid, you have to get out or whatever, then at least you know where you stand with that person. You can walk off, you can be angry, you can tell other people not to frequent that business. But when you don't know, you're at a loss to respond. And we see Nynaeve begins to give some responses that are her typical responses, which are a good tongue lashing. And that's where she starts, and then she suddenly realizes that's not going to work here. And she has to change her tactics because, again, she was very off balance because this is not a normal interaction. This is not a normal person. I don't think she had a clue how dangerous it was.
Right.
And I love the look of panic on Uno and Regan's faces when she started. She just takes the shawl off and, I can walk around naked if I want to, and it's none of your business. Because she had no clue how dangerous a ground she was on. She grew up in a society where men, they complained about women a lot, but they wouldn't lift a hand against a woman.
Right.
And the Shinarans, they take that even to another level. Any man would just be expected to, give his life to defend a woman or defend her honor and think nothing of it. So she felt like she could be safe around these people, but she was with an atypical person. She was with a person who was not, you can't anticipate his responses. You don't know if he's going to do something good or something bad. You know he's going to justify it in his mind. But he is an unhealthy, insane person. And you can't deal with someone like that in a logical way oftentimes. Again, I'm not going to give counseling advice, just to say when someone has reached this level of insanity, you could treat them with compassion, but you can't ever really let your guard down because you don't know what they're going to do.
I mean, it's to the point where Nynaeve found herself regretting speaking her mind, which she pretty much never does, even though that does get her into trouble, being so antagonistic with people all the time. She rattled off at him, like you were saying, about nobody gets to tell me what to wear, and no man should say that to any woman. I like that she didn't even make it just personal. She also made it like, hey, nobody should be doing this.
Right, exactly. And
even
she
though
was right
she wants to be modest. Even though, like, it's more like she should have the choice. She used to sort of believe, like, oh, it would be improper for anybody to wear, a dress like this. Is sort of how she used to think about it. And then she switched to defending it, which it's really more so that she's defending her choice, not defending, hey, showing cleavage is okay or whatever, but it's really just like, that's none of your business. That's for me to decide about myself.
Exactly.
And but she realizes, just from kind of his facial expressions and the stuff he starts to say after that was a mistake to speak that way to him. And even the way that Uno and Regan looked really had her kind of backpedaling a little bit. So then she was like, okay, I'm going to do all the things that I saw Alejandro doing. I'm going to say, the Lord Dragon this, the Lord Dragon that, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. After telling herself mentally she would not call Rand the Lord Dragon.
Exactly.
She starts with this mental exercise of, I can be like the oak rather than the willow. The oak stands strong and the wind breaks it over. The willow bends with the wind and it survives. So I'm going to bend with the wind right here. Did that, but then later afterward, she fusses at Uno and Regan for having not stood up to him at any time, for letting things get this out of hand. But it's when she was in his presence, I think the danger was more real. So, she was going with it because she realized that's what she had to do. She,
Yeah.
she had to play along somewhat. But,
And she may have also seen it as like they have a different responsibility than she does. She might have seen it like he's one of you. Like it's not like he even had command over y'all. Y'all were all just soldiers together, weren't you? And then also this is men's business and Shinaran's business. Like y'all should be reining in your own dude. Like come get your cousin. That's not my job. Might have been how she was thinking about it.
Right.
In addition to just like her usual hypocrisy. I mean, there's a huge possibility that that's what was happening when she later, sort of berated them for not standing up to him. But there could also be the element of that's y'all's responsibility.
Yeah. Well, and I agree. But of course, it's always easier to outline someone else's responsibility.
Exactly.
To leave things undone. When something is, and I always detest this, people leave shopping carts just in the middle of the parking lot, or they drop garbage when there's garbage cans out in the park, because well, somebody will clean it up. But you don't have to leave something for someone else to clean up, even though there is someone who's paid to do that. That's very disrespectful to do that. But
there's no need to make their job harder. They already work hard enough for it.
But it's easy to outline everyone else's responsibilities. Sometimes it's much harder for us to outline our own responsibilities and to live up to those. And so, she was taking that easy path there. But then, as you talked about with her thoughts about modesty and all that, walking into town to see the prophet, when it was just she and Uno at first, she was just fascinated by all the different people. And of course, true Robert Jordan fashion, we have about 2 pages of descriptions of what people look like and the way they're dressed. And there was one Domani woman there who was, her dress came up to her neck. It was proper in the cut, but it was so tight and the material so thin, it was almost see-through. At least it hinted at a lot of things. And she was scandalized by that. That's so improper for the woman to wear that. But then once she's challenged on what she's wearing, take the shawl off, and I'll wear this if I want to, and I will, I'll walk naked through the streets if I want to. So there's, again, a little bit of hypocrisy with her, and that's going too far until someone challenges her, and then she moves the goalpost even further. Now, one thing I did notice that made me think of grade school, and this was Nynaeve's thoughts about the way she was dressed as she was walking through the crowds. And she kept using the shawl to kind of cover up her cleavage. And at one point she finds some way to tie it so it stays in place until they jostle through the crowd enough. And it just made me think of a kind of a universal constant, that if you try to hide something about your body and make yourself inconspicuous, it always draws attention to it. I've seen this many times as girls begin developing. When they first do, they're kind of ashamed of that, and we
get terrible posture at puberty.
Right, terrible posture, trying to hide that fact, when it just draws attention to it. If you happen to be very tall and you slump down, again, terrible posture over it. It draws attention to your height. It seems like something we do. You get a pimple, and you're trying to do your hair a certain way, and everything to hide it. You're trying to hold your hand on your face like you're in surprise over things to hide it. It draws attention to it. Makeup, anything you do tries to draw using to hide something, draws attention to it. It's normal for people to wonder, what are you hiding? So, another quick lesson here, Nynaeve, if you were to listen to this podcast, I hope you would understand. If you don't want people to keep staring at your cleavage, just walk around like it doesn't bother you, like you have every right to do it, similar to how you acted in front of the prophet. And it generally works out better. It doesn't mean you have to show off, but if you're hunching over, you're holding your shawl over yourself trying to hide, you're making everybody look. And even when they're not looking, you think that they are, but you're definitely drawing their attention to it. So, small thing, but it's, I think, something universal, every society and every culture. If you try to hold yourself in a certain way to hide anything about your body, everybody's going to notice it.
Yeah. Why are you being sneaky? Humans are very, very good at trying to detect cheaters and people who are trying to get away with something that they shouldn't, according to whatever our group's rules are. So we compared to even other social animals, we're especially honed in to try to watch for people concealing something.
Yes, we are highly curious, aren't we?
Exactly. Great way to put it. Much more succinctly than I did. Good job.
That is. Anyway, that's all I've got about this chapter. That is, again, not filled with action, but is one that it always catches my attention and draws me to it, mainly because of how scary the prophet is. Had this been near Halloween, that probably would have been one of my takes on something scary in this book, because this man scares me a lot. Even reading about this fictional character scares me a lot. And I am a person who is very religious, very spiritual, but I can pick this out as this is not a healthy ideology that this man is selling to anyone.
Right. It doesn't even seem to be a very coherent ideology, for one thing. And that's one of the red flags, too, is that, he just kind of forgets what orders that he gives. It's not like there's clear tenets to it or anything. It's just like, these people follow this guy. And that's mostly it. That's dangerous.
It is. It is. It's about him rather than anything else. And
exactly.
That
we could safely call it a cult, I think.
Yes. The most dangerous kind. Yes.
Yeah. I don't have much else on this chapter. I just thought it was kind of interesting how Nynaeve misled Masema to believe that she's going to Tyr because Rand summoned her there. He pieces together a couple of things that she says to conclude that, and she runs with it. And I want to highlight that here at the end of my notes on this chapter, just because it lines up pretty well with how she continues to act in the next one. So I think it's a good place to kind of put a bow on this chapter to move on to the next one, which is called The Wheel Weaves. Surely that's not the only chapter with this title in the series. I did not do my research on that. But if you had asked me where is there a chapter called The Wheel Weaves, I never would have said somewhere in the middle of this Nynaeve stuff in the Fires of Heaven. But here we are, chapter 40, The Wheel Weaves, in which Nynaeve, after spotting Golod, insisted that the Shienarans and she head into an alley rather than the shops where she thought Golod would be more likely to look. It did turn out to be him, as she had expected, but unfortunately, he found them, understanding that she's always going to do not quite what one would normally expect. He seemed to think that Nynaeve was in danger from Uno and Ragan, so he threatened them and demanded to talk to Nynaeve. Nynaeve diffused the tension somewhat and agreed to talk. It turns out that Golod was in Gildan on orders to go to Saladar, orders that changed when the prophet's people started making so much trouble in town. She was stricken by the name of the town, Saladar, and tried to hide her surprise. That was where the blues were gathering. It was the name from the paper in the Amerlin study. As she tried to hide her reaction, she was cagey for now about where they were staying or what they were doing there. Golod didn't care what she and Elaine were mixed up in, just as long as he could swoop in and get them out of it, and he really hoped Egwene was with them, but she wasn't. Nynaeve tried to convince him that Egwene was safer where she was anyway, but still didn't give any more details about that. Golod swore on the name of Queen Morghese that he would help them, so Nynaeve relented and explained that they were in Valen Luca's show. Golod offered to buy them rooms to take them out of that horrible menagerie, but Nynaeve did not want to draw any undue attention, so she refused. She also did not allow Golod to come visit the show. This was partially to protect Golod from the scandal of seeing Elaine dressed in her spangled breeches performing on the tightrope, but partially to avoid drawing attention from anyone else, as White Cloaks had not been attending the show thus far. He could appear only at a certain location near the performers' wagons at sundown and ask for Nana. Golod, exasperated with how Nynaeve had an answer for every little thing, reluctantly agreed to her stipulations. He also agreed to find her a boat out of there, seeming to think Nynaeve had agreed to be taken to Camelin as he had previously offered. She did not contradict him, but instead let him think what he wanted to think. It couldn't hurt to have multiple people looking out for a boat on the way out. They could just go with whichever one came through for them first. Talking more to Uno and Ragan, she learned that she would She would have command of 15 Shinarans who were not blindly loyal to Masema and were willing to peel off from the prophet's people, which made her feel more confident in her plans. However, just like Golod, the men needed to largely stay away from the show to avoid attracting attention, with the exception of scheduled visits from one each, so they could report to her. She returned to the menagerie and found Elaine, explaining where she had been and what she had been up to. But during the whole conversation, Elaine was walking them towards the performance with Brigitta. Nynaeve had to save face and couldn't show what a coward she was, and had to go through with the performance anyway. She tried to view the onslaught of arrows as punishment for all of her recent recklessness. After the show, Uno made his first visit to her, and she urged him to press Golod and Masema both to find a boat as soon as possible. And thus ends Chapter 40, The Wheel Weaves.
Alrighty. This is one which we see a lot of deception from Nynaeve.
Yes.
Again, not intentionally. She's not sitting there thinking to herself, I'm going to lie to these people. But she is sparse with information. When they make a statement, she just allows them to go on with it, which is very Aes Sedai of her. She's not outright lying to them, although I guess technically she did to Masema just when she said that the Lord Dragon was calling for her, basically. I can't remember the exact wording of it, but so it's very clear she has not yet sworn her oaths on the oath rod, which of course we know she hasn't at this point in the story. But it's very, I'd say, very much in line with that way of thinking. She's learning at times to think like an Aes Sedai, but being true Nynaeve, she's only doing it when it suits her. She's not sitting there thinking, I need to become more Aes Sedai. I need to be more like these people. I need to earn their trust. I need to be one of the gang. She still wants to keep herself separate from that. She wants some benefits of being Aes Sedai, namely the training, especially in the healing arts, but then she wants the freedom to do her own thing and not be under their control. I would like to think that she's able to find that. She definitely has earned it by the end of the series. But yeah, I would like to think in my personal headcanon that she has earned that right and finds that balance, a way to be full Aes Sedai, yet never completely under tower control. I think Moiraine probably set a good precedent for that, and Nynaeve will definitely take every advantage she can get in that regard. Now, I'll pose this in the form of a question. How do you think she feels about men trying to rescue her?
She's always complaining about it, for sure.
Yes. Even in her thoughts at the beginning of this chapter, she says this to herself, quote, "When are you going to learn you can't depend on anyone but yourself?" End quote. That's as she's thinking about, the prophet. She basically went to him for help. That was not a good idea. Here Uno and Regan are trying to, quote unquote, rescue her. Then, just a little further, a couple of pages down, here's Golod trying to rescue her. And rightly so, Nynaeve, she gets tired of that. I still harken back to when Matt was in the tower right after having been healed of the dagger's influence. And he meets with Nynaeve, Egwene, and Elaine. And one of the things he tells them is, if you ever need any help, call me. And they start laughing because they had just been saying, anytime a man says, call me if you need me, basically, he's never going to be there. That means he's going to be somewhere else. And so
right.
he's no good to you at that point. And, it's one of these things, I explore this idea a lot because I think growing up, I always had the romantic idea of being the guy who comes in and rescues the girl. I think we all, we see it in movies a lot. It's pretty much a trope.
Yeah,
in most
it's everywhere.
Of the movies. And in a way, Robert Jordan is exposing that because it's somewhat in our nature, in human nature, for a guy to want to win a girl's affection and attention by being the hero. Many people do that through sports, whatever the sport is. If they are the fastest, the best, they get the attention. But oftentimes they want the attention because they want the girl's attention. So they want to be the hero. If they see that maybe she's sad, she has a bad home life, sometimes they want to come in and bring her happiness, bring her joy, and quote unquote rescue her from that. And it's something that I think men and women probably see differently. And again, Robert Jordan really helps to expose this. Men think that's the way to win a woman's heart or her affection. But guys, oftentimes she doesn't need rescuing. She needs somebody who'll come along and walk beside her and be there with her. Be strong when she needs someone strong. Be a listener when she needs someone to talk to. But not someone who will just rescue her and sweep her off her feet. That's romantic in the short term, but it's not good for a relationship in the long term. It's more of a parent-child relationship than it is a romantic husband and wife relationship or lover relationship. So just one of those things I want to throw out there. It's part of our nature to think that that's good for a relationship, but in truth, it just isn't.
Yeah, and I think that Robert Jordan tries to deconstruct that a few different times. I mean, by making heroines who consistently resist that, first of all,
Right.
but also by making some of the men's attempts at rescue fail or end up making things worse. I'm thinking of Gowing, I guess, the most.
Yes.
Gowing is the guy who really thinks that, I mean, he's been raised for that to be his job. And even if we're looking at this zooming out and just thinking about, a guy like Gowing, what's his role normally in the story? He's supposed to be the white knight, that kind of rides in and rescues someone.
Literally.
His services are not wanted. And even, I mean, he's supposed to be serving his sister, first of all. So he's not even where he's supposed to be. But he's sort of just like, I'm a prince in a story. This is where I'm supposed to go, right? And it doesn't work out for him or Egwene very well. I mean, ultimately it does for the pattern, but in super painful ways for those of us readers who like Egwene. But constantly she's having to tell him, I don't want you guarding my room. Go away. This is literally why I won't bond you or marry you right now, because you don't listen to anything I say. You're just making everything worse. So I think Gowing was kind of, created just to convey that concept, the point you just made, that, maybe women want more of allies and friends, even, like equals, than just a protector. It's not to say that people shouldn't want to protect their loved ones. It's just that that's not, like you said, most women probably aren't looking for that as a way for someone to earn their way into her affections. And even the idea of kind of doing some kind of feat to earn, like, my affection doesn't really mean anything to me. Like that. It's like, if I like you and your personality, I'm going to like you. It's not, you don't have to do a special thing, like go through I don't know, you don't have to create a portfolio of things that you've done to impress me.
Yeah, you don't have to climb the highest mountain or swim the broadest ocean in order to win my heart. Exactly, because it's nice to know someone is willing to go to those lengths for you. But I think typically we want to go to those lengths. Men want to go to those lengths for ourselves and claim it was for y'all, and that's just not how it works. So.
That's a really good way of putting it, and I definitely think that's what Gowing is doing. And as far as the other people who sort of try to protect Nynaeve, they literally are trying to protect Nynaeve because she has kind of bad instincts about some of this stuff, as we've seen in the past. And she even berates herself for that in this chapter. She admits she can't protect herself. She understands why I said I have warders, which we have griped at her about, like, okay, you should have taken Tom into town with you, or, you should have brought Julian with you, as we saw when she got drugged by Rhonda Macura, and kind of dragged Elaine into it with her. I think Elaine is so young and naive. She, we probably should have been expecting Nynaeve to be a little more of a protector in that situation, and she really wasn't. They ended up getting lucky by getting rescued later, but it could have been way, way worse for them.
Right.
Um,
And she does not intentionally put herself into a place where she has to be rescued,
yeah.
but she bravely takes on the world. She bravely takes
Yeah.
on the evils of the world. And so she occasionally steps into situations she can't handle, but she's not doing it for the purpose of, oh, I will do this so he'll come and rescue me and, and then we'll fall in love or any of that. It is always because she wants to be strong. She wants to stand on her own. And one of the things this story does teach us is that we need one another. Just as we've discussed before, Rand had to learn that Egwene and others had to be able to sacrifice themselves. Bashir and his wife and all of these people who gave their lives, they gave it for a good cause, and you have to be willing to let other people give and work and sacrifice. In the same vein, she has to step out there and do her part. She has to stand up against injustice and against things that are wrong, because that's who Nynaeve is. I'm
Mm-hmm.
glad she's not denying that part of her nature. She's going to be strong. She's going to be valiant. But, she has to let other people come in and be a part of that as well. She can't take it on by herself. And that's the part she misses. She keeps wanting to do all of these things and fix everything and heal these things by herself. And she can't. She needs other people with her, not just to rescue her, but to be a part of what's going on. They have a hand in this too. So, yeah, she has to keep learning that lesson, just as Rand has to keep learning it, just as many people do, that none of us are in this alone. None of us are in this by ourselves. We need each other. We depend on each other. But, especially if you're facing something big, you're going to need help with it. That doesn't mean you need to be rescued. It just means you're strong and you're independent, but sometimes you're not strong enough to do this by yourself. Let other people play their part and be there with you. Let them be strong beside you. And then you won't have to be rescued so often.
Right?
I don't know if that came out the way I intended it, but it sounded very, very noble in my mind.
Yeah. I got your point enough that, again, the editor will fix it in post. Make
Yes,
it sound nice
yes.
and concise if you need it.
The editor is very good and capable of what she does.
Just falling a little behind right now, but catching back up. Yeah, I think that, it's interesting to watch Nynaeve's relationship with this, issue of needing to be protected. And part of what might have changed this is her situation with Brigitta, and how Brigitta was helping her on her quest against the Forsaken and ended up getting hurt in the process. And Nynaeve had all this guilt about it. But she has sort of been confronted about that and realized that it is the responsibility of the person who chooses to make the sacrifice about what happens to them. It's not the responsibility of the other person that they are trying to protect. So I wonder if that, her coming to a place of acceptance and not constantly groveling to Brigitta and stuff like that, maybe that is changing a little bit about how she thinks about people protecting her. I don't know. I mean, she's still annoyed by it for sure, but she is acknowledging, hey, I can't protect myself. There have been notable times that I've failed and maybe I need, some backup.
Yes.
I think, too, something that stands out to me in this chapter is really in both of them, how good she's getting at this Aes Sedai manipulation and Aes Sedai ways of speaking. She's becoming a lot more subtle, which is not something previously I feel like we could have accused Nynaeve of being in earlier books. I think here she kind of capitalizes on the fact that Uno doesn't know exactly how she's tied to the tower. All Uno and Ragan know is that she went with Moiraine and Siuan from Faldara to Tarvalin. So he doesn't know how far she's progressed in the training, whether she was actually training to be Aes Sedai, whether she's full Aes Sedai yet, what kind of clout she has. So he's willing to kind of, because of that ambiguity, treat her as if she is Aes Sedai. And she kind of pushes that to see if he's going to. And just, notices that he will fall in line behind that, probably because of Shienarn's regard for women, but also because of their deep regard for Aes Sedai,
Yes.
and their kind of understanding and guarding the Blight border together, which Aes Sedai really aren't holding up their part of, by the way. But that's a different
Right.
story for a different time.
Yeah. The
She
Borderlanders are
capitalizes.
not failing.
Right, exactly. So she capitalizes on that ambiguity. She does that several times in these chapters. She does it with Massima, where she says a few different things and has an idea of how he's going to piece it together. She does insert one lie in there, at least, but most of it is just misdirection with clues. And she does the same thing with Golod. And here she's really conscious of the possibility that he might try to manipulate her. I think it's misplaced in this case because Golod is not the type of person to do that. His compliments to her are not even meant to be flattering or manipulating. It's just him saying how he feels about her, his assessment of her. He's genuinely attracted to her. Of course, Nynaeve, you always do things nobody expects. Of course, you're so clever.
Right.
You would have noticed that. He's just, to him, I think it's just stating facts.
Right.
She sees it a different way. I think that's smart of her to do that. She's on her guard with him more than she has been in the past, and she has been very easy to manipulate in the past. Moiraine had such an easy time doing it.
Yes.
And in previous episodes, we have wished for her to be more careful in a lot of ways. But here she's actually displaying that good sense that I had wanted to see from her, and wondering whether Golod is trying to manipulate her, and instead trying to manipulate him back. She sort of does the same thing she does with Massima. She seeds a few little different things that she says, and he ends up piecing them together to mean a certain thing, and she lets him run with that conclusion and does not challenge him. Right. And she's really able to play these two forces off of each other to try to either way get the quickest transportation out of there in the direction that she's trying to go. So Nynaeve has really leveled up her social skills, her subtlety in general. This is kind of new from her, I think, at this point.
It is. And I think being verbally smacked around by Brigitta helped her to
Maybe,
grow up a little bit, to realize that, that she's playing a very dangerous game here, and she has to do it wisely. And so she is doing that. Probably her couple of run-ins with Mogadine, at first could have really inflated her ego, but the last conflict they had, I think, did a lot to let the air out of the sails, to let her know that she's strong, but she's not as dangerous as the people she's facing. So she needs to get out of there. She needs to get with other people. You get that spark of recognition when he says the word Saladar, and that brings it all back to her. She knows where she has to go now. But that she does have to get out of town, but she's got to play this game wisely. And like you said, the circumspect way, she would basically say two sentences that didn't necessarily go together, but they were both true. But anyone who listens puts them together, and they believe something totally different. And it's, again, I think we've discussed it before. I find myself lying less, but very easily deceiving people if I have to, by playing the Aes Sedai game of not lying, but letting people kind of think what you want them to think, or think what they already believe, and you can reinforce that without lying. So it's kind of good on your conscience. I don't know that it's healthy to do very often, but I still think it's better than outright lying to people. So I definitely try not to do that. And I think most anyone who is a big fan of these books have tried that at times, just as we've all tried the trick about not sweating, the square breathing. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, you were the one that let me know it was a term, the square breathing, of controlling your breathing that way. And it's neat, and it does give a kind of, or has a calming effect on you. But trust me, it does not stop a fat man from sweating in southern humid heat. It's not enough. Nope. It doesn't work. But we've all tried it, I believe, at one time or another. Just as we've tried this Aes Sedai way of speaking, where we're not lying to people. We may have different levels of success at it, but I think we've all tried it. Now, Robert Jordan had to throw in his humor in this, which I love. I mean, Robert Jordan's humor is my jam. He really he knows how to push that humor button with me. When Ragan and Nynaeve and Uno are in the alley and to basically wait and see what Golod would do. And of course the two Shynarans draw their swords and they're standing in front of her because that's what Shynarans do. They're going to protect a woman. They don't know who this white cloak is, but they definitely do not have a good history with white cloaks.
Yeah.
And Nynaeve tells them, put away your swords. Of course they don't, and she sort of pushes past them. And here's a quote from her. Yet, though neither said a word, there was an air of muttering about them. And
She's
I
really
love
projecting.
that. Yes. And nobody but Nynaeve would pick up on that. They don't say a word, but there's this air of muttering about them. In other words, she was expecting them to mutter. She was expecting them to not like what she was doing. So she's going to imagine that whether it's happening or not. And that I just found so hilarious because it's so Nynaeve Almira.
Really
someone
is.
can be complacent, going along with what she says, following her orders, but if she's not happy, she's going to catch that edge of unease about them, supposedly, and in her imagination, it'll be there. So, I know this is rather subtle, but I find things like that so funny. And as I said, Jordan really knows how to make me laugh, and that was one of them that I caught that I really liked. Another one is when Nynaeve started giving orders basically to Golod, don't enter into the camp. It's going to be dangerous. You'll blow our cover, all of this stuff. Is the thought of if he had walked into camp during the day and seen Elaine not just in those spangled tight pants, but walking a tightrope. Can you imagine how he would react to it?
I mean, I think Nynaeve was right to shield him from that experience.
Yes, because Golod being the person who always did what he thought was right, whether it's right or not, he did what he thought was right. He would have blown a gasket. I think he would have lost his mind at that moment. And there's no telling what he would have said or done. I know it would have included destroying his career among the children of the light, but because he would have been telling everyone, that's my sister. I don't care if she's Aes Sedai. We've got to leave. I mean, he would not have held anything back. But just imagining the look of shock on his face and how he would have reacted was funny to me. It would have definitely been a bad turning point in the story. So I'm glad she protected him from that. But I found it funny just trying to imagine if he walked in and saw that. I think he might have died on the spot. Just his heart would have stopped. I don't think he could have taken it. Let's see. I believe that's all my notes on this one.
Yeah, that's pretty much all of mine too.
Yeah, I take it back. I did like the way Nynaeve basically starts gathering an army with her. Not a large one, but the Shynarans, all of them who are not blindly loyal to Masema. And she doesn't just say get them all ready, have them here, but let no more than 15 at a time come into the show. It's kind of a way of keeping it subtle, not letting everyone know, not alarming anyone, but she's starting to gather this small group of protectors around herself, and it's a good thing. They play a very important part in the story later. Again, their bonds are broken to their homeland, but she's forging new bonds where right now, basically all they've got to do is hang around Masema, but try not to get too close and try not to get caught up in what he's doing. And she helps them. I guess I didn't think of it till now, but it's a role reversal. She's rescuing this group of men because I think before long, had they stayed in that stew pot, things would have exploded. Many of them would have been killed because I think they would have reached a breaking point where they couldn't follow Masema and they would have to openly oppose him. And there weren't enough of them to do that and survive. So, she rescues this group of men. But
interesting.
But that was not her goal, but that is essentially, I believe, what happens. So, a fun chapter there where she starts out thinking of how, men are always wanting to rescue you, and then without thinking about it, she rescues them. And it just came to me as I was monologuing. So
nice. It's practice for gathering people under the golden crane, I suppose.
Yes, exactly. Does that make me a bad guy if I monologue often?
Ooh, I don't know.
That's some deep thoughts. But anyway, yes, I agree with you. I think it is practice for Malkir. And again, she will be instrumental in healing and bringing back in the nation of Malkir. And she definitely has some experience in manipulating the pride of bordermen or borderlander men, because that becomes important to help land gather an army. And it's one of those chapters that brings chills down my neck when she asks if her husband would ride along to Tarwin's Gap, to merchants and men like that. Yes, yeah. And she uses that. So I guess we see some of the building blocks of that right here, with her beginning to gather these Shinarans to her. And again, like I said, it's good for her and good for them. She needs some swords at her back in dealing with the Forsaken.
Absolutely, but those were pretty much all my notes on the chapter. Did you have anything else?
No, ma'am, that's all I've got. So I hope everyone will join us next time as we go through episode 13, and we'll cover the Fires of Heaven, chapters 47 and 48.
Wheel of Mind is written by Lajara and Giskel and produced by me, Lajara. Our original theme music was composed by Wendigo. You can find his new Lairs EP on SoundCloud, Spotify, and YouTube, and those links will be in the description. There are neither beginnings nor endings to the turning of the Wheel of Mind, but this is an ending. To catch a beginning next time an episode drops, subscribe to Wheel of Mind on Podbean, Stitcher, iTunes, or Spotify. You can also find our episodes on YouTube under the channel name Lajara Dane. That's LaJaraDayne. To leave feedback, rate and review on whichever platform you use to listen to us, or contact us at lajaradane@gmail.com or at mind_wheel on Twitter. To support the show, subscribe to us on Patreon by visiting patreon.com/wheelofmind.